for the human race, it's not such a good morning. And the most terrible series of earthquakes ever is now taking over the air of the Himalayas, Nepal, the highest point of this globe, which is affecting climbers on Mount Everest and affecting the whole population, including also the many who like to explore that area, who come here from Israel to reach these physical heights on our globe and have the adventure of mountaineering. And there's a series of earthquakes. Today they announced a further earthquake in northeast India. It's spreading the whole area and affecting thousands of people. They say already more than 4,000 are amongst the dead and 10,000 amongst the wounded. What is happening? No, there's something very amazing. And this is uncovered, the amazement is uncovered through the greatest biblical commentator of recent times, called the Malbim. I can tell you that there are people who study the Bible at universities, where unfortunately so many lecturers, non-Jewish, Christian, but also Jewish lecturers, they are Bible critics. And I know there were students who prepared the text of the Bible with the Malbim, one was fantastic biblical commentators, an expert on biblical Hebrew at the highest level, also a great expert on the traditions of the sages of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And his commentary on the 3rd chapter of Zephaniah is amazing. So therefore, in order really to understand what's going on, and to understand more deeply also what is mentioned in the Talmud, even more so in the Yerushalmi Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, it's a good idea we should all go and study this chapter. I'm going to paraphrase for you the commentary of the Malbim. Some of you might be able to see it in the original. So if you'll turn first of all to this amazing chapter of the prophet Zephaniah, which the sages also interpret to all the what you call acts of God, or they call in general literature, when unusual things happen, which are sometimes very tragic, on the surface of this globe. So it's on page Zephaniah, chapter 9, which is chapter 3. It's Zephaniah chapter 3, which you find on 709. Page 709. Now it's clear, according to the simple, superficial understanding of this chapter, that Zephaniah was speaking also about things that happened in his time. And first, let's say, in principle, the sages say that there were thousands of prophets and hundreds and thousands of prophecies. But the ones which were written down were the ones which were important for future ages, not just for their time. And that's why they've been preserved for us amongst the Kitvei HaKodesh. So he introduces, if you look at the first verse, Hoi mor'a v'nigala ha'ir hayona, which is translated here as, woe to her that is filthy and polluted, to the oppressing city. She did not obey the voice. She did not accept Mussar, correction. So in order to understand this whole chapter, the Malbim gives an introduction. He says, we've often explained that the people of Israel were brought through the desert to enter Israel and there to build up a holy kingdom under David HaMelech of all the tribes of Israel. Unfortunately, they did not preserve sufficiently high level, even under Shlomo HaMelech, to be able to bring the promised final Geula. That means that the people of Israel, in the land of Israel, would bring the wisdom of the Torah and the light of the mitzvot to all mankind, and bring mankind to the level, as it's prophesied, that war will become obsolete. It was that dream that's mentioned by the prophets of the first temple, Yeshaya and Micha, that all the nations of the world will accept the teachings that go out from the temple of raising mankind from the level of a human animal to the level that all mankind recognizes that we're created in the image of God, and we can learn that path from the firstborn son. That means God is the father of all mankind. He established a special relationship because of the merit of Avraham Avinu, which is descendants. And ultimately that remained only with the people of Israel, the descendants of Yaakov. And that they should be the pioneers in changing the world, as was promised already to Avraham Avinu. The whole world will become blessed. How they become blessed, that war and strife will become obsolete, and human beings will reach a higher level of the knowledge of the true moral God. So he says, when did this galut begin? Because there was a hope, there's still hope, there's a number of situations where there was hope. It began with the first galut, which was produced by Sennacherib, Sanherib. Sanherib came with his host of the Assyrians to go and take the temple. And Chizkiah HaMelech at that time was a very righteous king. And she chose the study of the Torah and the power of Teshuvah to the whole nation. All the 12 tribes. Although we know that already been the separation of the 10 tribes to the north, but still there was a hope. They will all change. But what happened was that first he captured the northern kingdom and exiled all of them, dispersed them. That was the first galut. 10 tribes left. It was really a downward situation for the power of the Holy Temple. And then he encamped with his 180,000 soldiers to besiege Jerusalem, which had a very small army. But because the righteousness of Chizkiah came and destroyed the whole camp in one night. Anyway, the first galut began with him. And from that time, we find that the prophets began to prophesy, don't think that this galut is the end of the Jewish people. And don't think that there's no more hope. That's when they began to prophesy concerning the redemption. And from that time, the total redemption was possible if the people of Israel would indeed have the merit. As is shown clearly if you study more deeply prophecies in Isaiah and Isaiah and other prophets. And the first time was in the time of Chizkiah. Even in the time of Chizkiah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make Chizkiah the Mashiach and Sancheriv Gog and Magog. The book of prophets is concerned with the way in which the nation of the world will attack the Jewish state, the state of Israel, at that time the state of Yehuda. Could have become fulfilled in that time if they were at a sufficiently high level, but unfortunately they were not. And therefore what happened in the days of Menashe, says the rulers, king of Assyria and the Babylonians, they imprisoned Menashe, and then the king of Assyria came a second time to go and destroy what was left of the state of Israel, which is of course only the southern kingdom. But in the days of Yeshayahu, who was such a righteous king, and when he found the Torah, he introduced the whole movement of Teshuvah. So Yirmiyahu thought that maybe there's a possibility now to experience the full redemption, because we've got such a righteous king who introduced the Teshuvah movement, the whole country. Although there's 10 tribes that have become lost. So Yirmiyahu started, like it's going on today as well, something like that, he started making a search for the 10 tribes, the sages say. But then it was much easier. They'd become dispersed all through the kingdom of Sennacherib, Sancherib, in different places hidden. But then it was quite easy to identify Jews all over the world, the 10 tribes. And he wanted to bring them back, and he was hoping that at that time, if Am Yisrael would do Teshuvah, even the remnant that was left in Eretz Israel around Yerushalmi, then there would be a possibility for this final Geula, the final dream, the utopian dream of mankind, expressed by the early prophets. But then he explained at the time when Nineveh was destroyed under King Jehoiakim, then we saw all that time was still a time when it was possible for the Geula to come if the people of Israel would have been sufficiently meritorious. But because they continued with their sinfulness and they repeated all the sins and weaknesses of the forefathers, the time was postponed. And what happened? So now the king of Bavli, Nebuchadnezzar, came, and he banished all the Jews from Jerusalem, from Yehuda. But he says there was still a possibility after 70 years of banishment to go and bring all Am Yisrael to Teshuvah, the time of the beginning of the second temple. The idea of the second temple was to give a possibility, and its spirit was even given to Koresh, the king of Persia, to help the people of Israel to go and rebuild the second commonwealth and rebuild their Beis Hamikdash. And then again there was a possibility of a Geula Olamit, of having eternal constant redemption. But unfortunately what happened in the second temple period, the power of wickedness became strong. There was a lot of especially social sins amongst the people, and many also assimilated to the ways of the Romans, and the spirit of the nation was divided between the different groups that went away from true traditional Torah, like the Sadducees and the Essenes. And from that time onwards, it is a question of a possibility which still exists, but it might take a long time. And then we have the situation promised by Acharit Hayamim. There will be a time when the lower lifestyle of mankind will still continue as long as the people of Israel don't do sufficient teshuvah. But there's a difference. If the redemption would have taken place at Chizkiyahu, with such a state, or Yoshiyahu was a great saint, or in the time of the Second Commonwealth, unfortunately, most of the Jews wanted to stay in Babylon and did not want to come, Ezra and Nehemiah, to rebuild the temple and the Commonwealth. So, at that time, it would have been, if there would have been a Geula then, it would perhaps not have been a Geula for the whole world. Because it would have been a Geula only for the people of Israel. They would have been redeemed. They would have kept the Torah in Eretz Israel with the Beit HaMikdash. It doesn't mean that then there would be a Geula to all mankind, as is prophesied, that all mankind will change as well. The whole world will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, like the oceans cover the seabed. So, because if it's going to take a longer time, and we're going to have a dispersion of the Jews all over the world, so it's already premonitions and prophecies mentioned, even the Chumash, that then the time will come when the influence of the Jews will percolate to all the nations of the world, and they'll all find out more about the Bible, and they'll find out more about the Ten Commandments, and then Yakiru Kol Ha'amim. Then ultimately, when that redemption comes, all the nations of the world will recognize the kingship of Hashem and His unity, and they will all of them call upon the name of Hashem, Keil Echad, as is mentioned already in Yeshaya, and also in the prophecies of Chagga and Zechariah, that the Second Temple period was regarded as a preparation for the ultimate Geula, which might take a longer time. And if you understand this, on the basis of this, we can understand this chapter here. Because if you look carefully at this chapter, it's remarkable that it goes from a description of terrible wickedness of the people of Israel and switches over to the time when all the nations of the world will gather together to serve Hashem. How do you understand this? So he says, this chapter, there's only one short chapter in Zephaniah, but it describes and makes known the destruction of Nineveh, the way in which the nations that wanted to attack the people of Israel will fall, and there's a prophecy that ultimately the remnant of the people of Israel will inherit the area of the early Palestinians, and also Ammon and Moab, and we explain how at that time they will be redeemed completely. So we'll start with the first verse. The first verse speaks in very negative terms about the oppressing city, the city that oppresses others, the city of Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi is Nura'ah. It's something, the city of Yerushalmi is something awesome in the eyes of the nations, because both in the days of Chizkiah and the days of Yoshiyahu, the nations around were very much afraid of Jerusalem. After they experienced the whole army of Sancheriv was destroyed in one night by the God who even the nations who idolaters recognized, at least He's the God of Jerusalem, He's the God of the people of Israel, and He's likely to wipe you all out in one night. The people, the nations around, they had some fear of this nation. So he says, it's also Nagoala. Nagoala means it's fit to become redeemed, from Lashon Geula, from the king of Assyria. So it was redeemed, the king of Assyria. And it was fit to be redeemed, a Geula Shalema, a complete Geula. And he calls the city Ha'ir Hayonah, Yerushalayim, which was subject to Assyria and Babylon. And we know their flag at the time had the form of a dove. And it's here called on the name of the kingship of these nations. So that's what happened to the city. Otherwise Geula didn't come. And the second verse says, Lo Shama B'Kol Hashem. The reason why, although that city was was feared by the nations around, but did not become redeemed, and instead, despite the movements of Teshuvah from Chizkiah of Yosheyahu, was because they did not listen to the voice of Hashem, which came from the true prophets, who told them constantly, you have to do Teshuvah, lakachat Mussar, to take ethical guidance, to turn to Hashem. On the one hand, Mussar contains the concept also of Yisurim. If you want to avoid suffering, then you have to follow an ethical path, which is directed by Hashem through His prophets. But it means also you've got to make that ethical directive inward, to cling to it. Hashem lo botchai did not. You've got to strengthen your reliance upon Hashem. You should turn to Him because He's the creator of the world. Because the Shem Havaya means He's the one who causes all aspects of creation, which you have to learn to recognize, says, as being the basis of true understanding. And then you didn't take Mussar, it says in this verse 2, says, El Elohea lo kareva. It means you've got to go to Hashem because you recognize that He has personal providence, hashgacha pratit, over you. That's why you have to recognize all success or failure of the people of Israel, of fortune, misfortune, is dependent upon you being near to Him and recognizing that you should have yirat hakmul va'onesh. You should at least have the minimum of listening to Hashem, that He is the one who gives you reward and punishment as a nation. That's verse 2. Verse 3 says, Sareha b'kirba arayot shoagim. The prince in its midst were like roaring lions. Shoftea zevei erev. The judges are like wolves of the evening. Lo gamula boker. They don't complete destroying their prey until the morning. What does this mean? He says, the princes who rule the people of Israel, they are interested just to manipulate others. They like to just have more power and more wealth, like lions openly eat up their prey, the weaker animals. And the judges, they are like wolves who tear up their prey in the night, in secret, and they hardly leave anything over for the next morning. That means, who are these judges? They take bribery when no one is looking around in their own way. And even the next morning, even the bones are eaten up. The next verse describes Niveo Pochazim Anshe Bogdot. Prophets in haste, they are treacherous people, and their priests, they profane that which is holy. Kamsu Torah, they use the concept of Torah as a means of oppression, to oppress others, because they distort it. The prophets, talking about the empty false prophets, they are even lewd, they are entirely without any morals. And the priests who are supposed to look after the temple, they profane it, because they distort the Torah. Nevertheless, despite all this, verse 5, Hashem tzadik b'keva. Hashem is still the power of righteousness in the midst of Jerusalem. And He still hopes that there will come a time, lo yasu avla. Even now they pervert justice, but He hopes that ultimately they will no longer continue to do iniquity. Yitain mishpato b'chol boker la'or asher lo nedar. He does not stop trying to introduce holiness into the city and to bring out true justice. And it would be fitting for the people to recognize the power of Hashem, who is in their midst and who sees all their deeds. And unfortunately, they don't have enough shame in front of him. If they would, then the situation would change. So, now this is the important verse, which is described by the sages as being the example of acts of God. And perhaps it fits best earthquakes, especially this one. I've cut off groups of the nations, the corners of their cities become desolate. I have made their streets so destroyed that nobody can pass over them. And their cities remain without population, nobody can live there anymore. He said, God does not want to destroy the Jewish people. So he always keeps a certain spirit, a remnant left, whether it's in Jerusalem or elsewhere in the world, that he still hopes that ultimately the people of Israel do enough teshuvah so that they'll merit to bring the total redemption to the world. But if they don't, then Hashem brings punishments upon the nations. And first I'll give you the famous statement made in the Gemara in Yevamos on this pasuk. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi poranut al Am Yisrael al umot ha'olam ela b'shvil Am Yisrael. The reason why Hashem brings terrible punishments upon the nations of the world is so that we will take Amati achtir ioti tikhu Mussar, the next verse. I said, surely you will take note of what's going on in the world and you will take from it moral directive to change your own lifestyle. And that way, the whole concept of the holy place of the Shekhinah, which is Yerushalmi, which is the people of Israel, will not become destroyed. Because I hope I'll bring punishment upon others to go and give you a warning. If you don't take note of punishment comes to others, I'm going to bring it upon you. That's how the Gemara describes it. So you see how the Malbim fits it into these verses. He says, when Hashem sees that the people of Israel are not sufficiently filled with shamefulness from the greatness of Hashem, who dwells in our midst, then asad tachpula acheret. He has a different plan. He destroys other nations. He brings destruction in their cities on 3 levels, he said. First of all, that all the corner places, places of communication and business will become destroyed, and the borders of the countries. And then the second one are going to destroy all their courtyards, all their streets, and that nobody will live there anymore. And then the whole cities will become entirely desolate, without any people living there. Amarti, I said, at least this will teach you, the people of Israel, Yirat HaRamamot. You'll see the bracha which one has said earthquake, Shekocho Uvarato Malei Olam. Same when we say on the thunder. You've got to say when you witness an earthquake. And you have to say this, to recognize Hashem is master of the universe. He does acts of God that can't be understood and certainly not controlled by human beings. That's what's happening. At least you'll take Mussar to have Yirat HaOnesh, so that I won't come and destroy your land in the similar fashion. Now, perhaps I'll say right away, there's no time I don't think there's ever been a time when this threat, which has taken place in that area, the Himalayas, has brought a reaction also of exactly what it says here. Hashem is saying, if you don't listen to me when it happens outside your area, it might happen within your area. Therefore, the whole of the state of Israel that today saying, well, here there are also great fears of earthquakes. There was a terrible earthquake 150 years ago. It's well known in the Galil and Safat. But all around Yerushalmi and everywhere, we are on a very difficult geological basis here, and we should know the same thing can happen here. That's what it says here. That's what Hashem is threatening us. Unless you take Mussar, take notice. So following here the Malbim, he says, Achriv Atzichem, Danke. Amati Aftiri Oti. I said, you should have awe only in front of me. As a result of this Yirat HaRomamut, I won't have to destroy the place of holiness that my Shekhinah is in your midst. So this applies, and did apply, in the time of Tzefania when there was a Beit HaMikdash. And it applies equally today when you've got the Makom HaMikdash. So you should recognize this is the place of the Shekhinah. And Tikru Musa Kol Asher Pakati Aleh, you should have some fear of the punishments that are likely to come onto Yerushalayim if you don't change inwardly. Ochen, he said, it didn't help. Unfortunately, the people of Israel at that time, they were so evil, despite the spurts that exist of a Teshuvah movement, but the evil was too strong. Ochen, therefore, it says in verse 8 now, once he counts up the evil of the nation and the punishments to bring them to Teshuvah. So therefore the time of the Gula, in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash, did not help. So therefore there can't be any more an immediate Gula. But I will wait for you. So now he said, you can't wait for me. I'm bringing destruction to the temple. You now will have to wait for me. You'll have to wait for me until the time comes known as Acharit Hayamim. And the Acharit Hayamim, because at that time there was only hope because of the enormous idolatry and corruption in which the rest of mankind was drowning, and the people of Israel were not setting a good enough example. Therefore, there was also no real hope for the people of Israel to be able to retain their Beit HaMikdash, and that's why there came the different troubles. There was only a small group left Babylon, and that small group also became corrupt through assimilation of the ways of the Romans, and through Sinat Chinam. But now you'll have to wait for the final end. And that you call the Yom Kumi, the day when I will arise. There's going to come a time when I will arise. I'll arise myself, I want to redeem you. And then it will be Lo'ad. Then I will redeem you forever. Then there will be Gula Nitzchit La'ad, after which there will be no Galut. What's the difference Galut and Geula and Aleph? If there's enough awareness of Hashem, the Galut can be transformed into the Geula. That's not the way of the Malbim, but it's a nice word. So the Malbim he said, then there'll be a continued Geula, different to the previous one. Because the previous times, whenever Am Yisrael would do Teshuvah, then they could be redeemed again. But that's not going to happen anymore. after the second Beit Mikdash was destroyed. You'll have to wait. You might have to wait a long time. And she says, how will the final Geula be? The final Geula will be, it says in this verse, that it says it will be a time when I'm going to raise myself forever. Then my judgment will be to gather all the nations and all the kingdoms, to pour upon them my anger, because in the fire of my jealousy, the whole of this globe will become consumed. I'm going to bring world wars. That's my judgment. It won't be a judgment to only people, it will be a judgment for all the nations of the world. So that all the nations will come to participate in the wars of Gog and Magog, the 70 nations. They'll gather together because they want to destroy Israel. From the east and the west, they want to destroy us. And Israel will be left alone. But I'm going to throw my anger over them, all my anger over them, and apart, chutz min ma she'en eshotam, I'm going to punish them for all their evils. Ve'esh kinati, I'll gird myself in garments of vengeance, because then, ki'oz, through the wars of Gog and Magog, the nations will in the end recognize the true God. And they will be azvuit, that they leave all their idols and they'll accept upon themselves the kingdom of heaven. Now I must say this goes together a bit because the prophecies of Gog and Magog are described in the prophet Yechezkel exactly as has happened in the recent century. In fact, I'll tell you an episode that when the 6 Day War started and Jewish people managed to resist when we were alone, both Russia and America gave us no support, the Middle Eastern nations had a stranglehold on every border and were going to destroy the state of Israel. At that time, I met together with the Panovich when that was announced. So I took out the prophet Yechezkel, where it describes the wars of Gog and Magog. Exactly, it describes all the nations around, including it describes the Russian peoples, and also the people from north, they're not helping. In fact, some of them were arming the enemies, wanted to have a stranglehold on the state. And if you look at chapter 38, 39 of Yechezkel, especially the commentary of Rashi, it says they'll come upon a people that recently escaped from destruction in Europe. There's mentioned there the Shoah, which destroyed the Jewish people, a big section of them, and they came to their own land again to go and live in security. I'm only really interested in having a bit of land where we could build our own lives, and then come all the nations around want to destroy us. So Hashem said, I will destroy them. They'll fight against one another, they'll become destroyed. And the phrases there that you use were dealing with non-conventional warfare. If you look more carefully at the things which were always regarded as figures of speech but became a reality, have become a reality through the use of non-conventional weapons to stop them. And that's the situation today again. Because today we're back in the situation when most of it's clear that the nations are not taking notice of the mistakes they made when the way they treated Hitler and his Muslim associate, the Mufti of Jerusalem. They treat him with kid gloves and with certain appeasing approaches, and they didn't even want to bomb Auschwitz. I mean, there's so many different things that have happened, and they're taking no notice. And today, Israel is a lone voice, basically. because the others is manipulating the situation, fighting with one another, using non-conventional warfare of killing hundreds of thousands even of their own, and we're left alone with the pursuit of true justice. So Hashem said, now He's taking it up for us. So here, this explains, He says, how am I going to change the nations? They're not listening to Noachide code. These days, they're defying the basic principle of Noachide code, which is mentioned explicitly in the Bible, and they really all know the Bible. And it's written in the Quran, it's written in the New Testament. They have to keep it. And they're forgetting the concept that man is created in the image of God, and instead they're behaving far worse than all the beasts of prey. They're not just like it says here, like lions and like the wolves. They're much worse than them, because these animals, they don't go in for mass killings that are going on today, and for killing people in such a cruel manner, which has now become for them even such a blasphemy. They claim it, doing it in the name of God. It's a terrible situation we're in. They don't care of using women and children as shields. They don't care beheading people in a terrible manner, and they don't care spreading gas and other things to kill thousands of innocent people. So therefore Hashem, now we're in the middle of we're still in the middle, haven't finished yet, with Gog and Magog, but this, what will it produce? It's going to produce a mapecha, or it's epoch. Hashem will produce a revolution amongst all mankind, that what is written on the walls of the United Nations, termed today useless nothings, the UN, but the United Nations, nevertheless, they put those verses, which is the utopia going back to Yeshai and Micha in their days, and which has more relevance today than any time ever. We know all concepts of righteousness which were incorporated in the United Nations Charter, which goes back to the League of Nations, which goes back to the middle-aged, big non-Jewish scholars who studied the Noachide Code, and on the basis of that, they're the ones who produced the United Nations Charter. But in practice, it's being corrupted. So let us hope that we will see the change. We have to do our part as well. If we will do teshuvah, then, as Chazal, as we see clearly, we've got to have this dream in front of us. The time will come when they'll all learn, as it says in this verse, I'll make a mapecha, revolution amongst all the nations. They'll start a new language, a new communication which is not based upon war, upon evil, but based upon Mussar. That they will all call b'Shem Hashem to serve Him together, Shechem Echad. So this is as far as we can go today. But I'll just take a couple of questions, and we want to continue this. Also to see what's prophetic important messages are given to us, particularly concerning the present situation of the earthquakes combined with the world situation, and the Mussar to be learned from earthquakes as described especially in the Talmud Yerushalmi. But meanwhile, any questions? Comments?
Yeah, question?
Yes.
Which level of tshuva does it have to be that in Israel to be done?
Well, ultimately Hashem knows, but in fact, when we'll come to the specific lesson of the earthquakes, then I'll leave that to when we come to the Gemara. The Gemara describes which specific aspects one should work on at such a time. I dealt already yesterday, it's on our website also. Yesterday I dealt already with the comments made in the end of Brochas, where we have this sugya, where it mentions the Broch, one has to say on earthquakes, and then there's a very deep message given in the Gemara Bavli, the end of Brochas, page 59. But if you, that I'm going to leave to you, you can You can see it on the website, or you can hear it on MP3. It's about so you can get a printout of it, I don't know. But I'm going to go further with the Malbim, together with the Talmud Yerushalmi, which is more relevant. It's earlier, in fact, than the comments of the late Amoraim. Yes?
I have a question also. In our prayer, Aleinu Leshabeach, the second part starts with Al Ken Mekaveh Lecha Hashem Elokeinu Lirot Mehera B'Tiferet Uzecha Lehaavir Gilulim Min Haaretz Ve'elim Kavot Yikartun V'Teken Olam Malchut Shaddai. Now, concerning to this, because I know that in these countries there's a lot of Gilulim and is this not a connection between the catastrophe which is there? Should we see a catastrophe? I mean, I heard that this is still there. Some
There's no question that we are not permitted today to pull down mosques and churches. That's what you're thinking of.
That's the halacha?
Yeah. No, you have to follow. Today, the guides of the people are the biggest Gedolei Torah. The consensus opinion is Mipnei Eva, we do not, even at the time of the Gemara, they didn't allow it. We're not allowed to provoke the nations. That's the worst thing. We have to try to, when the Golos, even got a state of Israel, when as they say, in Golos Bayidin, when Golos, in a very big Golos, and there's no way we're permitted to provoke the nations at all.
Yeah.
The only thing we have to do, we are permitted to defend ourselves because those who want to kill us and those who want to destroy our synagogues. And the way of defense is certainly opposed by any acts that are made to go and pull down their places of worship. We have to do something else. We have to establish a common language with those amongst the Christians and the Muslims or any other religious groups who accept the Noahide code basically, even though their concepts, there are many Muslims today who will accept every aspect of the Noahide code, in which case they have to be treated accordingly. Not only mustn't you pull down a mosque, you can pray in a mosque.
No.
And there are plenty of Arabs that unfortunately they're not as vociferous and as loud as the extremists who have distorted the Quran, but we got to ally with them, and similarly also with the Christians. Not allow them to go and as is happening today in the state of Israel, they're allowed to do missionary activities, and that can easily be forbidden by the government. But because if we're going to be anti-Christian, then the Christians will obviously, they will respond in more violent ways against us.
But in Nepal there's Hinduism and Buddhism, and in Nepal there's like Hinduism and Buddhism.
It's not up to us to destroy anything there. It's up to us to try to encourage the Jews who go there for excitement, adventure, to go somewhere else. They should choose a different Everest. Mi alevar Hashem, yakum b'kom kodsho. It doesn't say who will go up on the mountain of Hashem. You've got to go Mount Sinaitim and Everest. Because the highest mountain in the world is not Everest. And you can even say it's being shown today. Yeah? Because unfortunately those who are climbing Everest, so some of the rocks and the huge blocks of ice from the top of Everest are dropping down on top of the people who are encamped below. Yeah? There's at the moment 800 people still encamped at the bottom of Everest on the camp. 17 of them were killed already. And I think it's likely that some Jews amongst them as well who are trying to escape. It's a very difficult situation, and we should try to encourage young people before they go in their professions, let them come and climb the Yale Bahar Hashem. How do you climb the Har Hashem? It says, it means people who try to become pure in their relationship with other people. They've got a pure heart. They only want to spread purity and kindness in the world, and who are willing not to follow ways of deceit, of mirma. Asher lo nasa nafsho, it says, nafsho nafshi, who are willing to follow the dictates of the soul, and not just to follow all types of adventures that lead us away from the Jewish soul. Of course, it's true, some of the wanderings also, because there are some non-Jewish gurus in those areas, and some of the, as we described already, the prophecy of Amos, that there's some of the people seeking spirituality, they forget that they can find it here in Israel. And instead they go far east and think there's more spirituality there. So perhaps they're being taught a lesson. It's better, it's safer and better to go and explore your own roots. And thereby, by recognizing that the soil of Israel gives you the possibility to uncover the soul of Israel. And the soul of Israel is really the soul of mankind. That has to be our aim. Any other questions?
They burning lots of bodies there. What do you call it? Is that allowed? Is that allowed for 7 Noach laws? To burn the bodies instead of burying them?
Well, it's no prohibition for Gentiles. But there are, as it says, any Gentiles who perform some of the mitzvot, it's still considered something good. There's some mitzvot that they should not perform. Other mitzvot, if they perform, they get a reward. So if they will do burial, it's also considered a virtue, but not an obligation. Thank you.
Sure.